Sunday morning, man, she woke up hot. Good morning, everybody.
A couple of months ago, I made a pair of leg sleeves, and I wanted to show how you can make your own gripper elastic. Came out well. The silicone held up well. It's like through 20 washes. Just it doesn't look that nice. It's tearing apart in a few places. So this is the silicone I use, just regular silicone from the hardware store. But I'm going to replace it with some regular elastic and some new bands. Probably the pair that gets the most compliments. Everybody likes the print. First, I'm just going to cut off the old top part. I'm going to sacrifice a little bit of this because I'm going to have to re-sew a black band on. But that's part of repairing clothes. Normally, I'd get out over on my cutting mat and get out the ruler and stuff. But I'm not moving the camera around this morning. I'm just going to cut them off. My ever-present clips. I'm a clipaholic. If it moves and it's not supposed to, clip it. There we go. Old bands, not going to have any use for these, probably ever. Probably save these for some practice on some stretch knit. I already measured off some replacement bands. So what I'm going to do is just do what would be the inner side thigh seam. Just going to do a straight, the lightning bolt. Now I'm going to do the 3-step stitch on these. I cut them pretty close to size, so I'm not going to leave much of a seam allowance. Then I'm going to press it open and zigzag over it for a little bit of extra strength. Got the triple stitch, stretch stitch. Now to start with this, because you can't back stitch and it's knit and I don't want it to pull through my sewing machine, I'm just going to use a little tissue paper to stabilize the start. And since this is a seam, I'm just using the default whatever, 2.5 stitch length. I like the triple thread or the triple stitch stretch stitch for seams that need a little bit extra strength. Usually the inner leg seam of pants, shorts, the butt seam. I also use it when I put inset shoulders or sew flat shoulders on shirts. The tissue paper just tears right off. What I'm going to do for a little extra strength on these, I'm going to finger press open the seam here. I'm going to turn it right side out. Underneath here, I'm going to finger press open the seam. Then just do a quick zigzag over top of it. It's about the quickest and the easiest, probably the strongest seam you could do on stretch knits for activewear. Just finger pressing it open, so when I zigzag over it, it'll catch both sides. Be a little flatter than if I folded it over to one side. Now it's hard to zigzag over an entire leg seam, inner leg seam, because you can't get the fabric all the way through. Since this is only like 6 inches or 7 inches in height. It'd be easy to zigzag over this one. I finger pressed open the seam. Switch over to a zigzag. I'm going to do 4.5 width. 2.5 length. Make sure you don't sew the other part of the cuff in. And that's what the outside of the seam looks like. It's the inner leg seam, so nobody's ever going to see it. But it stretches and it's really strong. Switch back to my triple. Get out my tissue paper. Make sure I'm on my triple stitch. Sorry about my arm, but I got to hold these thread tails. Going to do a little bit of a lock stitch. It's a little awkward sewing without trying to cover up the camera. I know a lot of people use an owl when they sew, or they use a screwdriver, or they use their tweezers. Some people even use the seam ripper. I use a clothespin. That way, if I hit it with the needle, this will break and the needle won't be harmed. Machine won't be harmed. This will break easily. If you leave a little of the tissue paper in here, it doesn't really matter. As soon as it goes through a wash, it'll be washed away. Disintegrates within seconds when it hits water. Just finger pressing this open. Just finger pressed open the seam, and I'm going to turn it inside out so I could top stitch on the top. For a zigzag, the top part of the stitch does look a little bit better than the underside. Switch over to zigzag. 2 or 2.5 stitch length, 4.5 width. Make sure I have my thread tails out. I know it's good practice to lock stitch, but since these are short little pieces and I'm going to be using them right away for a leg band, and I'm going to be stitching over them, I'm just not going to bother with back stitching. And the thread I'm using today is Gutermann 100% poly general purpose. I think it's a 50 weight. I'm not really sure because half the time I look it up it says it's 40 weight, other times it says it's 50 weight. Doesn't say anywhere on the spool thread. Doesn't say anything on their website what the general one is. Now this, to attach the replacement bands on the thigh sleeves, I'm going to take off and do the free arm thing here. You're going to want to do it right sides together first. So here's a leg sleeve, right sides together. I'm going to turn this inside out. I'm going to trim off some of these thread tails. I'm doing it now. I didn't want to do it earlier because I didn't want it to unravel, so I just left them. But now I'm going to be sewing right over them. So yeah, this is inside out. This is right side out. I'm going to be putting this on top of this, or this through this. So it's right sides together. I'm going to try and line up the inner thigh seam with the thigh seam that I sewed here. I'm just going to slip it on here. It's a little stretched out, but not going to be too much of a problem. I'm lining up the raw edges of the top of the band here. Doesn't have to be exact on this. I'm going to move the camera over so you can kind of see a better idea of what I'm doing. And I'm going to do about a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm going to be using the triple stitch, stretch stitch. And I'm going to start a little before the seam and just do a full circle, lining up the fabric a little bit better here. This, you want to do a nice lock stitch. Let's see, make sure I'm on triple stitch. Yep. And I'm just using the default settings. Lower the presser foot. Guess it's a little over a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Let me move that down a little. Trying to be a little more consistent. There we go. Looks about a 1/2 inch. Doing the lock stitch. Now this is pretty tight around my arm of my sewing machine, so I'm going to be helping it out a little bit, moving through. Gotta adjust the fabric under here. Always gotta adjust a little bit as you go. Line the fabric raw edges up a little bit better. There's a crease under there somewhere. Straighten that out. I'm trying to just guide the fabric through, not really stretching it. Probably should have just folded it kind of over and did it on the flat instead of on the circle here. It's a little stretched a little bit. Line up the fabric a little bit more. Like I said, it's the 3-step, or the 3-stitch, or the 3-thread stretch stitch. It's 2 stitches forward, 1 stitch back. It is a really strong stitch. Almost impossible to pop it. If you stretch it really hard, you're pretty much going to rip the fabric and pop the thread at the same time. I'm going to do my best to go right over where I started, a couple of stitches. Then lock it down. Trimmed it pretty close on the threads because they're well locked with the locking. Here's my start thread. Got a little bit of a pucker because I was pulling it. I'm not going to worry about that. There. So this is the cuff added. Now I'm going to go ahead and start top stitching this. What I'm going to do with this, since I have quite a bit of fabric, I did a 1/2-inch seam allowance. I'm going to finger press it open. And then top stitch it so both sides will have an equal amount of fabric on it. I know they're just leg sleeves for me, but even when I'm just doing stuff for me, I make sure I try and do the best job I can. Now for top stitching, I'm going to try and do this on the top of the machine because it's just too tight to send through the arm. I'm putting the bed back on the machine. And I'm going to use the triple stitch to top stitch also. I'm going to start near the inner leg seam. Make sure the fabric is pressed open. It's going to be a lot of fingers in the way here because it's going to be manipulating a lot of fabric. I apologize in advance. What I'm going to do is start a little past the inner thigh seam. sure that where I finger pressed it open is still finger pressed open. And I want to top stitch about a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch or so from the seam. I'm going to lock stitch this in. Since I'm going to top stitch, I'm going to go to the longest stitch I can, which is 4. And it's a lot of back and forth. Just slowly manipulate your fabric. Normally I do the top stitching on the leg sleeves here before I do the inner thigh seam. So it's top stitching on the flat. This is top stitching, which is called top stitching on the circle. It's not going to look as good or as accurate as doing it on the flat before you do this thing, but I am replacing the thigh band. Don't have to top stitch it. A lot of people say, oh, that's unnecessary. It's a lot of work. Yeah, well, it's mine. And I want it top stitched. Making sure it's still pressed open on the inside. Now this can be a little complicated because I'm going over a serge seam, folded over. It's going to want to move everything around a little bit. Sorry about my thumbs being in the way. Just try and go as slow as you can. I'm manipulating the fabric. Check for finger pressed open seam. If you've worked with a lot of knits like I have, you can kind of feel with your fingers whether or not it's still pressed open or finger pressed open. There's 2 layers here, 1 layer here. You can kind of feel the fabric edge there. Just making sure it's pressed open. I'll have to admit, not my best top stitching. Trying to pay attention to the camera, watch my language. Trying to keep my fingers out of the way so you can see what I'm doing, but lock stitching that in. Trim off the thread tails. Let's take a look and see how this came out. Now I'm going to do another row on the other side of the stitch. Yeah, it came out pretty good. I'm going to do another one on this side here. The pucker that was there kind of got flattened out, so that's cool. A little messy there. Not quite as consistent as I wanted to be with the width of the got a little wide there, but overall acceptable. Now I'm not gonna do the other top stitch. What I want to do is show you how I do elastic on leg bands. This is how I do most of my waistband, easy waistbands. There we go. The replacement cuff. Here's the top part. To set this up, there we go. It's going to be a real close up here. I put the fabric here. This is right side, so this is the inside of the leg sleeve. Try and find the, there we go. That's the inner leg seam. So that's where I'm going to be starting and stopping my elastic. Now, a lot of people cut, quarter, pin their elastic on. This was designed to be around my upper thigh, tight enough I don't have to have gripper elastic or the silicone, but not too tight that it's going to cut into my skin. So this garment was really a bespoke garment or a couture garment cut specifically for my size. Now, to do this for a client, you'd really have to take a lot of body measurements to do it. To do them retail, you have to do it in a range. Like this is set for my 17-inch upper thigh. But if you're going to make this to sell as like, I guess, a medium, you'd have to make it with a little looser elastic to cover like from 15 to 18 inches. So doing a retail is much different than doing bespoke or a couture. What I do is I start this a little, try and get it this as flat as possible. This is called sew-in elastic or sewn-in elastic. I'm just lining up the elastic here with the raw edge of the thigh band or thigh cuff. I'm going to go to a zigzag, a 3 stitch length, because it doesn't have to be really super strong, because this is going to be folded over onto the inside and then top stitched on. In width, I'm going with a 3 on stitch length and 6 on width. Now, I'm starting the needle just past the elastic and the raw edge. And since this is going to be folded over and top stitched, I'm not going to back stitch. And you don't have to stretch it. Like I said, it's already been cut and sized for my thigh. And I'm just going to go and do a whole circle around, doing the zigzag over the elastic, catching the bottom fabric, just going over the edge ever so slightly or right on the edge. And it takes a lot of fabric manipulation, but you don't have to use pins, clips, don't have to quarter it. And I'm always adjusting it so the raw edge of the fabric and the elastic are right next to each other. Waistbands are a little easier. You have a little bit more room than upper thigh band, waistband, thigh band. You just continue all the way around. And I'll never win a speed sewing contest. I think one of my spirit animals is a sloth. Now, I'm getting close to being to go over the edge here. So I'm gonna line it up the best I can here and kind of guesstimate the trimming of this. Reline up my fabric here. I'm just about all the way around. Then I just lay this back over top. Just sew a little bit more. Yeah. Where I'm just gonna overlap on top of my other elastic at the start of it. There we go. Now it's going through 2 layers of elastic. Back down to 1 layer. And that's how you do the sew-in part of the elastic. Just trimming the thread tails right now. This is where I sewn in the elastic. Now, as you can see, I'm not bothered to sew down here or the other part here or on the bottom, because you're going to turn this inward. And then spend a little time stretching it a little bit to help set the elastic in there. Then what you want to do is make sure the elastic in here is really up to the edge. Push, pull a little bit. The better you get it up to this edge with no gap, the better it is. So I pull the fabric here. You can my fingernail under there. The elastic, I'm making sure it's up there, nice and flat. I go all the way around, fingering it. A little bulk here where the seam goes over. I'm going to see if it fits well on my arm of my sewing machine. Thread tails. Yeah, it'll work. Yeah. To make this look as nice as possible for your top stitching, most sewing feet have notches You have edges of here, edges here, edges here. What you want to try and do is line up this with something here where you could spot and watch this part. Don't watch this part. Don't watch your needle. Try and keep this in the exact same spot all the way around. It'll just make it look a lot better if it's really consistently all the way around. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lower the needle a little. And for this one, it looks like I'm going to do it right on the center notch. Now, depending on what kind of foot you have, this one doesn't have notches. Neither does the Teflon foot. You can use your clear foot at this point, your straight stitch foot. Sometimes this is a little easier to line up stuff. You do have a few notches, not many. I'm just going to use my standard foot that's on here. Just going to go line it up with that notch. Going to want to do a lock stitch. Oops. Still had it on zigzag. Let me switch it back to the stretch stitch, the 3-thread stretch stitch, 4, I accidentally had it still in the zigzag. Your ever-present seam ripper. There we go. Not too much trauma or drama on that one. Gonna try and there we go. Back on my stretch stitch, 3-thread or triple thread or triple stitch stretch stitch. And crank to lower the needle, lock it in. And the 3-thread goes triple stitch, goes 2 forward, 1 back, 2 forward, 1 back. And like I said, I'm trying to line up with that notch, the center notch. And this elastic I used is 1.5 inches. For waistbands on underwear, thigh bands, I like either at minimum 1 inch, 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches. On swimwear, probably 1/2 inch. Try and line up where you started, go over a few, lock it in. Now, I'm going to do several rows here. Not really for strength, you just need one at the top, one at the bottom where it's folded over. Should be right here. But I like the look of several of them. So I'm just going to raise up my presser foot, put my fabric in a little farther. And just so I have something easy to line up with, I'm just going to line up the fabric edge with the edge of the foot. And I didn't trim the threads, I'm just left them there. Because when you can move them around here and you don't have to trim them. Lock stitch this one also. Do another row of top stitching. And what I'm trying to do is just concentrate on keeping it lined, the raw edge, the edge of that fabric with the edge of the presser foot. So this line stays as parallel to the other one as possible. When you're doing top stitching several lines like this is where you can really notice if you don't really line them up well. And I'm hearing a slight change in the stitching. I think I'm about to run out of bobbin thread. Little thread left on it. I have the back up here with some thread on it, a little bit more. It's the two I've just done. As you can see, they're fairly consistent. I'm going to do a third one. And for the third one, I'm just going to line up this stitch line with the outside edge of the presser foot. So this space here will be the same as this space. Lock stitch it in. See how the sound is a little different with a little bit more thread on the bottom, bobbin? I'm just making sure I'm trying to align that stitch line with the outside edge of the presser foot. Going over a lot of stuff, you want to slow down just a little bit. When you sew a little slower, your machine has a little bit more torque. And I believe I have just enough room with the 1.5 inches to do another spacing down. So I'm just going to move it up to the stitch line outside of the presser foot. Yep. Lock stitch it in. And then for this band, I got 4 lines fairly parallel. Most people would have just done the 2, the top up here and the bottom here. Style, construction is all just as important as just, oh, just do the 2, that'll be enough. I'm never going to say that when I make something. Oh, it'll be enough, or it'll be okay. It's just not my style. I know this is the upper leg band. It'll be covered by a pair of shorts. Nobody's ever going to see it but me. But having the best built, nice style, custom fitted, it makes you feel better when you put it on and while you're wearing it throughout the day, versus if it's in your mind that it's just okay. No, I'm not just okay. Or it'll be okay. Let's take a look and see how this looks. Fairly consistent, all parallel. A little thinner on this lip here than these two. That's how you replace this, which worked, but I thought looked awful, to now it looks like this on the inside. Looks like this on the outside. This was a smaller waistband. I think it's 1/2 inch, no, 3/4 inch. So I could have done 3, but I didn't want to sew through these. These look much better. See, nice and tight. And that's it for today's live video. Thank you for watching.